Привіт, I'm Chuck Olenek. I'm a reenactor. And I'm also Ukrainian-American who was baptized with the name Yaroslav, and that's the name I use in the organization, the Society for Creative Anachronism. And what I've been doing of late is I have decided to take a deep dive into Slavic folklore and mythology and to retell some of the tales and use a video format and put them up on my YouTube channel to make these tales more accessible and maybe a good starting place for someone who's interested in the topic. By the way, it'd be really cool if you subscribe to the channel. So I've been going through stories of the Bogatiri, the heroes, who served at the court of the mythical Prince Volodymyr Bright Sun, Volodymyr Red Sun, who held court in Kiev. And one of the Bogatiri that I'm getting to now, the one I'm getting to today, is Diuk Stepanovich. By the way, Diuk is not a title. Sometimes you'll see his name spelled as D-I-U-K or D-Y-U-K, and that probably is a Ukrainian thing, Russian thing as far as the spelling, because Ukrainians use the letter I and the Russians don't. But the title, I've seen this sometimes where people write down, hey, that's really a title. You know, it's Russian for or Ukrainian for Duke. No, it's not. That title's Herzog. All right, which sounds awfully Germanic. So, Diuk Stepanovich, he is kind of a popular topic with a lot of the oral recorders of the Russian ballads, and he's a bit like Solovey Budimirovich. He's one of the foreign knights coming from an exotic foreign land to visit the court of Kiev, and that allows us to kind of get an outsider's view of the court. And he may come from Galicia or Karelia. Most often, Diuk is supposed to be coming from India, but it's not the India of reality. It's fairy tale India. And it could be confused with the old name for the Caspian, Kovalinsk. And so here he is representing this country that's way far away from the court of Kiev. So, usual story. It usually starts with Duke wants to go visit Kiev, and he wants to see the court of Prince Volodymyr. And his mother is saying no. And she warns him of all the dangers, and then what ends up happening is the son tells the mother, I'm going anyway, so I want your blessing. Fine, you have my blessing. And that's where we're going to begin. So who can tell us of the things of old, of the things that have been, of the things that were, of Duke, the son of Stepan, of Diuk Stepanovich, of fabulous India, and of his visit to the court of Prince Volodymyr Bright Sun. One evening, young Diuk Stepanovich bowed low before his mother, the most honorable widow, Mamelfa Timofeevna. Fair my lady mother, must I stay at home forever? I am tired of roving these streets. It's time for me to ride far, far across the open steppe, to throw back my heroic shoulders, urge on shaggy my dappled bay, and prove my youthful prowess and daring, to see people, to see Kiev the glorious, and behold, Prince Volodymyr and his fair Princess Apraxia. Give me thy leave to do these things, and blessing. Mafelfa Timofeevna made answer, my dear child, thou hast never been on the open steppe, nor heard the roar of the wild beast, or the yell of the Tatar. And thou wilt go to Kiev town? Kiev town is dangerous, my fair child. It is full of people who would squeeze thee like a grape. And all this to see Prince Volodymyr? At last, Mamelfa consented, and as Duke saddled Shaggy, Mamelfa warned him, "Do not boast of thy orphan's possessions, of thy riches, nor of thy mother. Son, I pray thee, do not boast." So Duke rode forth, and when he was come to royal Kiev, he leaped the walls, passed the three-cornered towers, and came to the royal palace of white stone. In the spacious court, he sprang from his good steed, struck the butt of his far-reaching spear into the earth, and flung his good steed's bridle over the point. The Princess Apraxia was there, looking out. "Lo, the washerwoman," quoth Duke, and bowed. "And where is the courteous Prince Volodymyr, the fair son of royal Kiev?" Then was Princess Apraxia very wroth, and the servingman made answer, "Royal Volodymyr is at mass." So Duke, that good youth, vaulted quickly into his saddle and rode to the cathedral church. There he dismounted and left Shaggy, unbound and without orders. In the cathedral he took his stand in the place of the ambassadors, the left porch. While the mass was sung, he prayed not so much as gazed about. He gazed at the church and gulped, at Prince Volodymyr and shook his head, and at the Princess Apraxia, who had arrived. And he dropped his hand. After Mass, Diuk Stepanovich brought himself before Prince Volodymyr, bowed low and greeted him. And as they spoke, great rains had fallen upon the black earth of the streets of Kiev, and the way was covered in mud. And Duke looked upon the mud and what it was doing to his shoes of green morocco, and shook his head, and upon Prince Volodymyr, and shook his head. But the prince heeded not, and began to inquire of him his name and country. And these things Duke told him, and how he had come to view the marvels of royal Kiev town, of which he had heard so much, to greet the fair son Volodymyr, and to pray to God in his temples. Then Volodymyr took him by his white hands, and led him to the palace. When Duke beheld the palace, he again shook his head, and said to his good steed, "They will starve thee here, good Shaggy. They will give thee frozen oats to eat." A great feast was held, and food and drink covered the oaken board. And as was the custom, all began to make great brags, some of one thing, some of another. And Duke alone sat sad and silent, eating not, nor drinking not, nor carving the white swan. And courteous Prince Volodymyr spoke. "O thou good and bold youth, is the feast not to thy liking? Or art thou poor perchance, with nothing whereof thou mayest vaunt thyself?" "Fair son Volodymyr, Prince of royal Kiev," answered Duke, "I have far greater possessions than thou. My father left me a little lad and rich, and I am not used to eating black bread." Yet courteous Volodymyr was not affronted by his speech. Then the green wine was brought, and liquors, and rolls of fine wheaten flour. Duke drank but half of his wine. The other he poured under the table. The top crust of the cakes he laid upon the table, the middle he ate, and cast the undercrust to the dogs beneath the board. At this, the bogatiri and boyars were outraged and disgusted. "Why dost thou throw away my wine and cakes?" asked courteous Prince Volodymyr. And Diuk replied, "I cannot eat thy wheaten cakes. The upper crust tasteth of pine, and the lower crust of clay. For your ovens here are brick, your oven brooms are of pine. But my mother's, her ovens are of glazed tiles, and her oven brooms are of silk dipped in honeydew. He who hath eaten one of my mother's cakes longeth for another. Thy wines and sweet liquors I cannot drink, for they are musty and ill-flavored. But in India the rich, my mother's sweet mead and old liquors are kept in silver casks looped with gold, hung by brazen chains in caverns 40 fathoms deep. The store of my lady mother's flowered garments is never exhausted. The horses eat only the finest Turkish wheat, and we have 12 deep vaults filled with gold and silver and fair pearls. This would easily purchase royal Kiev town." Then spoke royal Volodymyr in displeasure. "I would that Fyodor Blenkovich the fop were here, for he would know how to answer thee as thou deservest." Thereupon the oaken doors of the banquet hall opened wide, and Churilo entered, clad in a fine white blouse without a girdle. He crossed himself and bowed to all, save Diuk Stepanovich. Then said Diuk, "The fame of Churilo's beauty was not false, but the fame of Churilo's courtesy is but a lie. He knoweth not how to do homage nor to salute." Quoth Churilo, "Dost thou boast, serf, of thy wealth and possessions? Lay a wager now with me, a great wager of 30,000 hryvnia. For 1 year we shall go about Kiev town. Each day we shall wear fresh apparel. Each day ride a horse of a different color. And he that hath the fairest shall be judged the victor." "Thou dwellest in Kiev town, Churilo fop," said Diuk, "and thy presses are full to overflowing with raiment, while I have but my traveling garb, and it is well worn." Nevertheless, Diuk made the wager. Diuk then wrote a scroll to his mother, instructing her, bidding her, pleading with her to send garb. And this he tucked under Shaggy's saddle, and he told Shaggy to fly as swiftly as the wind to fair India, to his mother's palace, and to neigh loudly. And this Shaggy did in less than a day. And the honorable widow, Mafelfa Timofeevna, read the scroll. "Ay, my son has been bragging. He boasted, yet I must save his honor and his head." She dutifully packed up the garb and loaded it upon Shaggy's back, and bid Shaggy to fly as swiftly back to royal Kiev town. Then Churilo Blenkovich the fop and young Lord Diuk began to ride about royal Kiev town with new garments and horses every day. Churilo had great herds of horses driven in from Chernihiv. Diuk anointed Shaggy with morning dew and changed his color every day. 1 year they rode thus through royal Kiev town, 1 year and 1 day. The last day was Easter, and they went to Mass, and they stood on the porch on either hand. Churilofop was arrayed in amazing garments. He was blinding and brilliant in his colors. But Diuk wore something drab. It had been the garb which had covered his other garb. Prince Volodymyr declared that Diuk had forfeited. And then Diuk removed the outer garb and showed how resplendently dressed he was. Royal Prince Volodymyr declared Diuk Stepanovich the winner of the wager, and with the 30,000 hryvnia that Churilo had bet, Diuk purchased green wine for everyone in Kiev town, and they drank to his health. This was not good enough for Churilo Plenkovich the fop. In anger, he demanded another wager, and this time it would not be for mere hryvnia. They would wager with each other's heads that they would leap the wide Dnipro River, which was 3 versts wide. And he who does so can take the head of he who fails. The wager was made. The race was run. Churilo's steed fell into the waters while Diuk crossed the Dnipro in a single bound. He then grabbed Churilo by his curls and drew his sword. But old women began to wail and weep, and young women began to wail and weep at the fate of losing Churilo Plenkovich, for he was pleasing to their eyes. And even Prince Volodymyr stepped in and pleaded that Churilo be allowed to live. Diuk scornfully told Churilo, "Get thee with the women, since it was they who pleaded for thee, but do not come into the presence of heroes again." But Churilo spoke with malice. "Fair Lord Prince Volodymyr, if this child boasteth with reason, let us send talisman to the splendid Indian land to take lists of all his cattle and possessions." So Volodymyr appointed Dobrynya, Nikitich, and 2 more to make the list. If Diuk had the greater possessions, then should Volodymyr become his vassal, and contrariwise, if Diuk's brags were not established, then should he serve Volodymyr loyally so long as he lived. Dobrynya and his companions set out, and after long wanderings they came to India the rich. They climbed a lofty mountain and beheld the land glowing before them. At first they feared that perhaps the land was set ablaze, but when they drew near, they saw it was but the golden roofs of the dwellings flaming, and the temple's precious domes which glowed, and the ways strewn with tawny yellow sand. Diuk's palace of white stone had 33 towers which flowed together at one point. Their domes were all sheathed with green copper. About the palace lay a garden of 70 versts, set with all manner of pleasant fruit trees and shrubs. In all Kiev there was nothing like it, and all Kiev town would not suffice to purchase that palace alone. And through the town flowed a river of gold. Dobrynya and his companions entered the first tower, and they found there an aged woman of motherly aspect. Her garments were of pure silver and silk, and they bowed low to the earth before her. "Hail, most honorable widow Pamelfa Timofeevna, mother to Lord Diuk Stepanovich," they said. "Oh, I'm not the Lord Duke's mother," said the woman. "I'm his cowherd." And Dobrynya and his companions were sorely vexed and shamed that they should have done such reverence to a cowherd. And they met other women who they bowed low before them, thinking each one was the honorable widow. Yet they turned out to be Diuk's washerwoman, his cook, his chamberwomen, his baker of cakes, his nurse, and others. But they were all of such stately mien and stature and demeanor, and their garb was finer than anything that Princess Apraxia would wear on the most holy of feast days. At last, they found the honorable widow, and Dobrina Nikitich chose fine words, as he always did, and bowed low and greeted her and told them of their mission to count the possessions of Diuk Stepanovich. But the honorable widow, Mafelfa Timofeevna, would not have it. No, first you must have bread and salt, and you must eat, and you must refresh yourselves. And then there will be time for you to count. And this was done. And the possessions were so many and so vast in number that Dobrina and his companions threw up their hands in frustration and wrote a scroll and sent word back to Kiev, to Royal Kiev Town, and to Prince Volodymyr Bright Sun, Red Sun, and told him, sell Kiev for paper, sell Chernihiv for ink. There is not enough here to you could not possibly record what Diuk Stepanovich has. You know, it is without number. It is without limit. And Volodymyr and Churilo the fop and Diuk Stepanovich rode for India. And just as the talisman had done, Prince Volodymyr and Churilo stared in amazement and feared to enter the palace. But Diuk took them by the hands and led them in. And Prince Volodymyr gazed in wonder at all that was about him and acknowledged himself the vassal to Lord Diuk, as they had agreed. But Diuk said, I do not need thy service. Go home and look to it that henceforth the unknown man and stranger suffer no offense in thy house. It was at the feast I heard this tale, there it was I drank mead ale. Though it flowed down my beard, my mouth stayed dry, for never a drop passed my lips, swear I.